Welcome to another Apollo Papyrus podcast episode. I am Aaron Apollo Camp. For this episode, my interview guest is the founder of The Writing Room, a South Africa-based company that provides copywriting, mentorship, and literary agency services to authors, and is the author of 5 nonfiction books: The Other Side, Love and Above, Write Your Book in 100 Days, Romance 101, and Hey Baby. Her name is Sarah Bullen, and my interview with Sarah will follow the teleportation sound. Sarah Bullen, welcome to the Apollo Papyrus podcast.
Fantastic to be here all the way from Cape Town, South Africa.
Feel free to introduce yourself to our listeners.
Aaron and listeners, I am an author. I'm a multi-published author, and I'm also a literary agent, and I work with authors and writers to get their stories written in a way I always say that others want to read it. So that's what I currently do. So I work with authors all over the world and also represent them and sell their books to publishers on their behalf.
In a few days, your novel, The Other Side, is going to be released, and it'll be available after this episode becomes available to listen to. But as this interview is recording, it's not quite out yet. Without spoiling too much of The Other Side, what will it be about?
Well, The Other Side is actually a nonfiction book, and it's following up on my previous book, Love and Above. Love and Above, which came out in 2022, was a story about my own near-death experience. So in 2012, which is over a decade ago, I was in a coma. For 1 month. I was diagnosed with influenza. And during that month-long coma, I had a very extended near-death experience. A decade later, I wrote a book about it because I'm an author, Aaron, and that's what I do. I write books. So I eventually, 10 years after it happened, felt I had something to share. And I sat down and wrote a book which is called Love and Above, which has done incredibly well internationally. And I have followed it up. The follow-up is called The Other Side. And this book was really exploring the question, who else has been to the other side and what messages have they come back with? So it's a really intriguing question. And I set out to ask a whole load of people who've either traveled to what we call the other side of the curtain, that place we go to when we die, which nobody's quite sure of what it is. So I interviewed a whole load of people, or I spoke to people who can speak to it. So psychics, mediums, people who can communicate via trance, via plants, via dance. So it's a really fun book, and it's a very unusual and exciting book. And I'm actually launching that next week. So that's really exciting.
You've also written, and you mentioned Love and Above moments ago, but you've also written the nonfiction books Write Your Book in 100 Days, Romance 101, and Hey Baby. Without spoiling too much of each of those books, what are each of them about?
So my job, as I said earlier, is helping other people write their own stories. And really taking anything they've lived in their life and putting it in the written format. So it's not as easy as you think. And I only have gained the experience because I've been for many years an author. I'm also a professional ghostwriter writing for celebrities. So I really started with my first few books, which was Romance 101 and Hey Baby, to understand how do you make a true story really gripping and exciting. And my work then moved into helping other people write that and getting authors published. It was in 2020, after mentoring authors for 17 years, working with novelists, with nonfiction authors, with normal people, with celebrities, that my 3 books ago, which is called Write Your Book in 100 Days, came out. And this is really one of my favorite books I've written, Aaron, because it takes all of the processes and all the tricks of how to write a good book or how to tell your story. And it puts it in a very systematic program for people. And I really love that book. It's probably the book that sold the best out of all my books because it's used by people who want to write their story. And it doesn't have to come out. When we write our stories, they don't always have to be books. Some people write their stories as a series of newsletters in their blogs. They write it as a TED talk. Some people want to write their story just for their 50th birthday or their 70th birthday speech. So this is a book that really takes people down a process of asking, well, what is your story? And what's the best way to share it with others, people beyond your family, the general public? So, we always have a story we tell about our lives, but how do we tell it in a way that actually shares something with others rather than just is about us? So that book really is the one that travels all over the world, that I speak about everywhere, and I work with authors on. So it really is a practical book. And the other two books were written, Erin, my first book, which is Hey Baby, I wrote that in 2005. I was a humor journalist. I worked for magazines all over the world, Marie Claire, Cosmopolitan, Men's Health, Women's Health, and I was so lucky. I was asked to write a book. I mean, how lucky is that? One of the big publishers, Penguin, said, will you write a really humorous book about having a baby? And of course, back then, 2005, I was gung-ho. I had a newborn baby, and I said yes instantaneously. And that was really my first entry into the world of writing books. That baby I wrote about in 2005, and the hilarious kind of birth and first few years of being a new mom. That baby is celebrating her 21st birthday party in a few weeks. So that book is old. And yet I still speak about it. I still do book talks about it. I still promote it. So it's a really interesting journey of the last 20 years of writing so many books and still being in support of other authors, which is my number one career.
What do you love most about writing?
Wow, writing is so much more than sitting down with a keyboard or with your dictate app or with a pen and paper. It is a process of understanding yourself and your life. Anna Yin, one of my favorite authors, says we write to taste life twice. And I really believe that. In my own writing and in writing about my own life and lessons, particularly about my near-death experience, it was writing as a way of understanding and seeing your life at a distance. And it's one of the only ways, because when we write something, it is externalized. It's not in our heads, it's not in our hearts. It's suddenly sitting on a piece of paper or in a diary. And suddenly, something that we've been living with, be it a traumatic experience, a fantastic experience, a hilarious experience, a family crisis, a lifelong kind of relationship with something like food or health, something that was a part of us, a being, a living thing inside of us. Suddenly, it's something else. It's sitting on a page, it's sitting on a series of pages, and it allows you to look at the story you've constructed and to sit with it and then ask yourself, okay, this is really interesting. And how do I tweak it? How do I edit it? How do I make the story more interesting? How do I make it better? And as you move as an author through all these stages of writing, and as you improve and refine your story, something very strange starts to happen in which you look at it objectively and you start to see, well, that's not me. That's a piece of me. So my first book was me when I was a young mum. My second book or third book, Love and Above, was me traveling through a cancer journey with my husband and a near-death experience of my own. And I look at that now and I think that was a time, that was a parcel of my life, that was an episode of my life. And aren't I lucky? I wrote it down. So I actually have a memory of it and a recall and a book. So apart from the fact, Erin, that writing is such a beautiful, quiet time to have with yourself, those hours and hours you spend sitting with your memory, sitting with your diary, sitting with your family, asking them what they remember. Not only is it a quiet time with yourself and your life, but it also is a healing process in that it allows you to take out a part of you and wrap it up and say, okay, I did that. And I don't know if I have to carry that forward with me now. And I find this with authors, right? I mean, I work with authors for 17 years, writing books, anything, it can be anything. And that process of looking at what you are writing and saying, oh my word, So that's how I saw my mom. And that's how I saw my family. But I was 17 then, and now I'm somewhere else. And I often say, writing is a verb and it's a doing action. It's not thinking, it's not dreaming, it's not pondering. It's actually a really physical action that results in a product. And it's a powerful action, and it can carry and it can change your own life. And the good thing, if you're writing a book, or if you're writing a talk, or if you're writing a blog, is it can not only change your life, but your message can change other people's lives, or certainly touch their lives. Whether we can change somebody's life, I don't know, but we can certainly touch somebody's life. So writing about your own story has the ability to carry across countries and borders and time and space. And that's so powerful, really, isn't it?
If you have a writing routine, what is it like for you?
Oh, that's such a great question. And I love that word routine, because that is the absolute heart of what it means to write. It's not sitting to think about writing, it's actually how do you actually get your bottom in the chair, your fingers on a keyboard, and not just for 1 hour and not just for 2 hours, but if you're crafting a book for 4 months, okay? These are the big challenges. So for me, I have always found I don't like to dabble. I am not that person, and I don't encourage my authors to do that 1 hour a day or 1,000 words a day. And many people are very effective when they do a daily writing practice. And I have tried that over many years. But for me, I am a feast or famine writer. And what that means is I have to allocate big pieces of time. And by big pieces of time, I mean every Friday, the whole day from 8 until 5, I write. That's going to get me short form writing. And short form writing, I mean my newsletter, my Facebook updates, LinkedIn, blogs, those kind of things. That kind of writing is not going to get you a book. When I have a book commissioned, or I'm writing a book for a celebrity or a thought leader, I block out 4 months. And I literally mean 4 months in my diary. Not everybody could pull off a book in 4 months, but of course, this is my job. So I'm maybe particularly faster than others at it. And I will literally take in my diary and block out November, December, January, February. Of course, I'll allocate sometimes for social events and Christmas, and it's not all day, every day. And I will, from that start day, sit down and I will not stand up until I have completed that project, that first draft of the book. Bearing in mind, the first draft is around about 80,000 words. So it's the length of a doctoral thesis, a master's thesis. It's long. And if I don't allocate that big bulk of time, I don't tend to get something done. So the first thing is the amount of time actually allocated, and simply in my diary, right? It's as simple as that. It's in my diary. That's what I'm doing. My deadline is 15th of February. There is no way I'll ever miss a deadline. And the second thing I do, and I encourage people and all authors to do this, is create a writing ritual. It's really hard to build what I call the bridge between your ordinary life and a creative space. It is easier if you are a sculptor and you walk into your pottery studio and you put on your apron and there's the clay. It's easier if you're a painter and you walk into a studio with an easel and you pick up your brush. But the bane of writers is the fact that we're sitting on our computers. And on our computers are all the things to distract us. There's Facebook, there's Instagram, there's TikTok, there's email, there's notifications coming in. So I really encourage everyone to create some ritual that signifies to your nervous system and to your brain that you are not working, that you're sitting down now, and that time is dedicated to actual creative pursuits. And it can be anything. Hemingway poured a big glass of whiskey and lit a cigar, right? People go to coffee shops. J.K. Rowling wrote all of her Harry Potter books sitting in a coffee shop and writing it with pen and paper longhand. And that's ritualistic, right? That's something very particular that's signifying to her body, I'm writing now, I am doing something, I'm creating. For me, It's a cup of tea. It's shutting down everything else. It's turning off my phone. It's quitting every single thing on my computer except for my Microsoft Word. And it's not allowing those to open and closing my door. So those are my particular rituals. Because it's really hard for us. It's really hard for us in life to really dive so deep into a singular creative process when we are being demanded of to stand up, open the door, answer emails, make lunch, hang the curtains, fold clothes. There's nobody sitting saying, be true to this calling you have to write. So we have to find that within ourselves. And I have one more trick I really do is that I put a lot of visual cues above my desk. So above my desk, I have beautiful mantras. I have things that say a word at a time, 3,000 words a day. I write it out. So when I look up, I'm actually reminded visually of what I'm doing. I put the visual of my book cover. So that all these things reinforce the fact that everything is out there to distract me. And if I want to end up with a book in my hand, I need to shut out the rest of the world and just be true to the process.
Now, I know Hey Baby was traditionally published because you mentioned a major publisher taking that. Are all your other books traditionally published, or some of them self or hybrid published?
Absolutely. So all of my books are traditionally published, except for Write Your Book in 100 Days. And I want to tell you why. So I have a publisher. I'm with Penguin initially, and I'm with Jonathan Ball, who are my publishers. But when I came to writing Write Your Book in 100 Days, I did some mental maths, and I'm going to tell you what those look like. Firstly, I shot it off to one or two publishers. I shot it off to Penguin. I said, are you interested in this book? And very quickly, they got back to me and said, not really our market too niche and too small, which I totally understood being a literary agent, because publishers are looking for books that have a wide market. So that book, I looked at my database. I looked at the number of people within my email list. I co-authored it with my business partner, Kate Emmerson. Between us, we had about 40,000 people in our database already. And we just said, you know what? We are really happy to pay for this book to be published because we can probably sell more of it than a publisher can. And that has proven to be very true. So this thing of self-publishing and hybrid publishing is really, really important for authors who know that they have an ability to sell their own books, that they don't need a publisher to say, this is a good book. So it's a very viable way to get published in this day and age. It allows you to spread your message. And it allows you to really step onto a platform as a published author. And frankly, it's not as expensive as people think. In fact, there are hybrid publishers who will support you in the publishing process and allow you to buy your book per unit at far cheaper than a traditional publisher will sell you your own book at a unit. And of course, not to forget that we have print on demand via the publishing platform of Amazon, it's really an author's best friend because it's allowed authors across the world to sell their books globally by simply having your product on Amazon. So it's such a viable model, Erin, and people overlook it, and people don't quite understand the publishing industry. It's changed so much. It's changed so much that traditional publishers are in a little bit of a battle against authors who understand that they themselves may be their best publisher. But of course, what we did do is we didn't do it with our 14-year-old nephew designing the cover. We absolutely went to a hybrid publisher. Even though we're in the publishing business, we paid for the best possible editor, the best cover design, the best publicist to publicize the book. So we treated it as a business, as all authors should do. And the book is as professional and slick as the books published by Penguin. And that's good to know for all the authors out there.
You've effectively answered a question I had later on. So The next question I have: how is the book publishing industry and landscape different in South Africa than it is, for example, the United States or the United Kingdom?
Yeah, well, look, all books are sold by territory. What does that mean? It means that books are sold in countries, and each country has its own particular likes and dislikes in the publishing industry. So, for example, in the USA, where I was last year and I'm coming again next year on a book teaching some courses, in the USA, a really big seller is current affairs. So the genre would be current affairs. In fact, you walk into any bookshop and you're going to see any of your Barnes and Nobles, the shelves that are stretching meters and meters down all the aisles of current affairs and politics. And equally so, you're going to find books like history books are very widely sold. And then you, of course, have all your novel authors as well. So we always, books are sold by category or genre. And each country likes particular things. If you walk into a bookshop in Holland or Norway, you're going to find quite different books. You're going to find the more noir novels, the kind of, the Sven Larsson Go with Dragon Tattoo, they're not as genre specific as American books. So each country has its own publishing market. South Africa is no different. Australia is no different. The one thing is that in all territories, publishers like homegrown authors. They want to sign an author that lives in a particular country. So an Australian publisher is only going to sign Australian authors. South African will sign South African authors. British publishers, UK will sign UK authors. Canadian authors, and so it goes. So a publisher's responsibility in a way is to find and cultivate talent in their own country. So we have local books. We're going to call them local books, right? And in Africa and in South Africa, we have a shelf called African fiction or African books. It would also be current affairs. But much the same as the US, as Canada, as anywhere in the world, we also love those really big name authors. And the truth be told is that they do dominate book sales. And I'm talking in, let's use people we'd know, your Stephen Kings, your Lee Childs, your Sarah J. Maas is a huge name now in the Bloomsbury young adult publishing, your J.K. Rowlings, your Jamie Olivers, your Nigella Lawsons. These are authors that transcend all borders. And you're going to find their books literally anywhere in the world. The Tony Robbinses, the Simon Sineks. These authors, they cross all borders. So each publishing industry has its local grown authors and it's got your international megastar authors. And of course, you are always competing against them. So a buyer walking into any bookshop who's looking for a crime novel may see a new debut novelist who's from South Africa or from Australia or from New Zealand. And then next to that debut novelist, there sits Lee Child. There sits Karen Slaughter. There sits one of your James Patterson. So it's such an interesting business because you are competing always against these superstars in the publishing world. So we are always in this industry looking for new voices, new authors in the novel realm, in the nonfiction realm, who come from any territory, who simply like touch on a nerve of the younger generation. And we like to mix them with the tried and tested bestsellers, your Danielle Steele's, right? But they have to make space for the new authors. So it's a fun business, and it's also a fair business that everyone has the opportunity to compete really in a bookshop, and compete in what we really call an open marketplace, where anybody, you walk into a bookshop and there's this incredible buffet of choice, right? I mean, you walk into a bookshop and you're almost overwhelmed with these covers and these names and these books, and the buyer walks up and they look at the books and they look at the cover and they read the back cover and they make a really considered buying decision every time. Is this book going to take me on an adventure? Is this the book to be lying on the beach in Spain reading this holiday? Is this the book that's going to give me business leadership skills that I'm desperately needing in my company? So they're making a buying decision. And I guess the hope of every author is that that buyer who's walked up to your shelf where your book is stocked is going to pick yours, because that's the game.
I only have time for a couple more questions. You run the Writing Room, which is your literary agency and provides quite a few services for authors. What services does the Writing Room provide for the authors you serve?
We really do have a from beginning to end service. So we take an author from the idea of a book, and this could be either a novel or a non-fiction. There's an entire mentorship process, which is let's work together for 4 months or 12 months and slowly and consistently get this book written. Okay, that's the first step. Let's just get the book written. And that's not the end of a book, because then you walk down the process of revision, which is second draft, third draft, fourth draft, fifth draft. So we move an author from the beginning all the way to the place where they have a final version of their book ready to send to a publisher. In addition, we offer as well a publishing service. So those authors who are not picked up by your Penguins or one of the Little Browns or Simon & Schuster's, we then have a referral in which we work with a self-publishing hybrid publisher that takes the book and goes through all of the processes. There's an editor, a copy editor, a designer. So the book will then be laid out, edited, designed, printed, and ultimately either loaded on Amazon or on the bookshelves. And really, I think, Erin, the most important thing is that as an agent and as one of the main coaches on this, we really push people to have a book that is publishable, that is good, that is solid, that's readable, and that can actually end up on a bookshelf. So it's from beginning to end. And some of our authors and many of our authors get placed at publishers. In fact, I think this year I've had 7 of my authors, which may not sound like a lot, but it is a lot. I've had 7 of my authors placed with fantastic international publishers. And those who don't get placed to the publisher, there is that next step, which is this is actually how we're going to get your book to market. If it's 200 copies or 5,000 copies you're looking for, there is actually a solution out there.
I have time for one more question. What do you love most about mentoring your fellow writers and authors?
Oh, what a rewarding career. And I often say, Erin, I run writing retreats as well. So my authors come to Greece, to Spain, and we sit and we're walking the Camino de Santiago next year in Spain where people are writing. And I often say this is the best job in the world, because working with people, it's not a short thing. I'm not working with people for a week. I'm not an interventionist. My job as a writing mentor and coach is a long run. Most often I'm working with people for 3 or 4 years, not just through the 1 year that they're writing a book, but through the launch and through their second book and through the third book. And it really is a lifelong relationship. And I think that is so unbelievably rewarding. My first career was as a journalist, and as a journalist, you file a story a day if you're in the newspapers, or a story a week in magazines. And that kind of quick relationship wasn't for me. So working with authors, it's the journey of a lifetime, because writing a book is such a big thing. It's such a long thing. And really to have the honor of hearing somebody's story and slowly, gently coaching and crafting a story that really starts to grow it like a really good wine. Sometimes these stories have got to mature and percolate. And sometimes we put a book aside for a year. We say, let's just rest this for a bit. It's not quite ready. And then in a year time or 2 years time, an author will come back and they'll join one of my weekly writing sessions, or they'll say, Sarah, I'm coming to Lamu on your next writing retreat, and this is my final push. So really, Erin, it's the long-termness, and it's a standing at book launches when people's hearts are shining and their stories are out in the world, and they feel like they've made a difference.
Sarah, thank you for appearing on the Apollo Papyrus podcast. You were an amazing guest.
Thank you, Erin. It has been an absolute honor and a joy to chat to you.
Sarah was an interesting and insightful guest. I'm grateful that she's able to tell her stories and help others tell theirs. This is Aaron Apollo Camp reminding y'all to find your writing and reading purpose. Bye for now. Copyright 2024, Aaron Apollo Camp, all rights reserved. This podcast episode is intended for the private listening of our audience. Any reuse or retransmission of this episode without the express written consent of the podcast host is prohibited, except under fair use guidelines. Royalty-free music and sound effects obtained from https://www.zapsplat.com.